Hey everyone, thanks so much for coming back to watch another one of my videos. I really appreciate you coming. So I'm excited to jump back into the golden era of the Mafia, which is way before like the 90s. So this mobster that we're going to look at today was born in 1929. And that's a perfect timetable as far as the Mafia goes, so I'm excited to tell you about him. Joseph Crazy Joe Gallo was born April 7th, 1929 in Brooklyn. He was born in the Red Hook section, and his parents were Mary and Umberto Gallo. They came from Torre del Greco in Naples. They came to the U.S. by boat in 1920. His father was a Prohibition-era bootlegger. I think a lot of these mafia guys that we see, their parents are doing that kind of stuff, so this isn't really that outside of the lines. And their father expected his three sons to follow in his footsteps in his life of crime. They also had two daughters, Carmela and Jackie. Umberto used to tell stories about how he could have been as famous as the Rockefellers during Prohibition, but his shipment of booze sank somewhere in the Buttermilk Channel. He made a living carving religious figures out of stone. When Prohibition hit, he made a lot of money selling homemade booze, and he backed a major loan sharking operation, and that made him even more money. So he had a lot of money. And with the profits of all of that, he bought a restaurant. Usually mobsters' nicknames are sarcastic or funny monikers of their personalities. Like you'll see little XYZ, but they're really big, like little Tony, but he's really a big guy. Or Big Tony, etc. But in Gallo's case, it seems pretty on the money, and it seems like it was a nickname that he had that nobody ever uttered around him. He was diagnosed as schizophrenic when he was 20 years old after he was arrested, and he showed up in court in a black zoot suit, and he laughed right in the judge's face. His laugh was so bizarre that the judge had him sent to be institutionalized. He was temporarily admitted to Kings County Hospital Center in Brooklyn, and that's where he was formally diagnosed with schizophrenia. Gallo went to PS 179 on Avenue C in Kensington, Brooklyn. And then he went to Brooklyn High School of Automotive Trades in Williamsburg, but he dropped out of school the day he turned 16. So as soon as he was able to do it himself, he did it. Shortly after graduating high school, he got into a car accident where he bumped his head really bad, and that led to him having a nervous tic. But I have a feeling that might just be something for show, for lawyers. I don't know if that's real. It could have been. He acted a lot more crazy when he was in the courtroom than he did in his everyday life. With his father involved in the mafia and a mental illness that took away a lot of the fear and caution that most people use to stay law-abiding citizens, Crazy Joe was rising quickly in the New York crime families. He rose through the ranks as an enforcer and a hitman for the Perfacci crime family. The Perfacci crime family later came to be known as the Colombo family. Later, he formed a crew with his two brothers, Albert Kid Blast Gallo. Albert was given this name for his use of the word blast in place of the F word. For instance, he would say blast it instead of F it. So that's where he got that nickname. And Larry Gallo, called the Cockroach Gang. Later, they became known as the President Street Boys, and that's just because that's where their dormitory location was. It was on President Street. He and his two best friends, Peter the Greek Diopoulos and Frankie Punchy Iliano, would often rob stores and come home sharing the swag that they obtained with their friends. So these are young kids, 16 to 20, 21. So they'd go and rob clothing stores and come and give clothes to the boys. And they were just known as people that had all the balls, none of the fear, and they provided for the family. He never got any treatment for the schizophrenia that he was diagnosed with. And if that tic was real, that's a traumatic brain injury, and he was never treated for that either. This led Gallo to have an explosive personality. There's a story about him where he went horseback riding in Prospect Park with Pete the Greek, and he tried to turn his horse, and when his horse wouldn't turn the way he wanted him to, he got off and punched the horse in in the face. Can you imagine walking in the park and seeing some dude get off a horse and punch him in the face? Like, that's crazy. I love animals, but the thought of getting so mad at a horse that you fly off the handle like that is it's kind of funny to me. I'm an animal lover. Don't attack me. I love them, but he punched a horse. Even with the diagnosis and the TBI, a lot of people thought that the crazy may have been an act just to scare people. Apparently, he was pretty friggin' scary, so if it was made up, he did a good job selling it. When people would fall behind with payments, he would come in and say, "I'm a paranoid schizophrenic. No telling what I'll do." Those men always paid. So maybe there was nothing wrong with it. Gallo joined the Navy in 1948. He was already established on the streets, but he really wanted to see the world, get out of New York. He got kicked out 6 months later for emotional immaturity, which really just meant that he couldn't get on board with taking orders and being given criticism in basic training. I know firsthand when you go to basic, you have drill sergeants screaming in your face 24/7, and if you're somebody that has been arrested a bunch of times, has gotten into trouble a lot, and you have no fear, it's almost impossible to get through it. I've seen a lot of people get kicked out at that stage for that exact reason. It never ends well for them because they make the decision that you're going to be kicked out probably a month or two before you actually do. So you're just sitting there at basic while they're trying to process you out. It's really not a fun process. Anyway, he got out 6 months later and he started working rackets under Frankie Schatz Abate-Marco, who was a Bensonhurst bookie, and alongside the Garfields, a frenemy gang, which included Carmine Persico. Abate-Marco ran the Perfacci family operations in Brooklyn. Once Gallo became of an acceptable age, he continued with his duties as an enforcer for the family, but he also became a hitman as well. He and his crew had an apartment on President Street in Brooklyn. They called this the dormitory, and that's where they all congregated. It's like a base of operations. At this apartment, Gallo kept Cleo, his pet lion, in the basement. And things like this is why he was called crazy. This man was a savage and had absolutely no problem killing people. But he was also pretty savvy as far as being a business owner went. He owned multiple businesses and he did it secretly because his criminal life was pretty public. He didn't want it to interfere with the success of the companies that he owned. He owned a bunch of nightclubs in Manhattan and 2 sweatshops in the garment district, and he just kept that completely secret. Nobody knew that he was the owner of that. On October 25th, 1957, Joe Gallo was 28 years old and he was working under Joe Perfacci. Perfacci had ascended to the boss of the family, which is why it was called the Perfacci family, and Gallo was his hitman at the time. So Perfacci asked Gallo to complete a task that had been in the works for a while now, and this is really sad for me to say. At the time, Albert Anastasia was the boss of the Anastasia family, which would later come to be known as the Gambino family. The underboss of the family, Carlo Gambino, had been swindled by Vito Genovese, who is the worst human being in the world ever to live. If you want more information on that entire situation, you can go ahead. I have a video of Umberto Anastasia that will explain the whole situation there, but this is what was going on. Genovese wanted to take out Anastasia so he could take over the family. He knew that he couldn't kill the leader of his family, who was Frank Costello, without also killing Anastasia, because Anastasia was really close with Frank Costello. Anastasia was the leader of Murder Inc., and Anastasia was crazy. So Genovese, being the little worm that he was, went to Gambino and convinced him that if he helped him kill Anastasia, he would make sure that he got put in place as the leader of the family, even though all of these guys grew up together from a very young age. Of course, Genovese was too much of a coward to do anything himself, so he reached out to Joe Perfacci to ask for help for the assassination. Perfacci handed the baton to his hitman, Joe Gallo. Joe Gallo and Carmine Persico entered the Park Sheraton Hotel on October 25th and killed Albert Anastasia with a hailstorm of bullets. This was a huge, huge headline-grabbing mafia hit. The murderers were never officially charged, but the NYPD came to the conclusion that Genovese ordered the hit, and they didn't really care who actually did the hit. I'm not gonna lie, when I first saw that Joe Gallo was the one that killed Albert Anastasia, I automatically hated him, because Anastasia is probably one of my favorite mafia members, other than Luciano. But at the end of the day, it's not like Joe Gallo conspired to kill him. He was just told to do it and he did it. So I can't hate on Joe Gallo for this, but it hurts my soul. Genovese had this plan and was trying to execute it for a very, very, very long time. He had been whispering in anybody's ears who would listen about how Anastasia was a crazy person, and the only way to prevent him from taking the entire mafia down with him was to kill him. He got impatient though, and he hired Vincent Gigante to kill Frank Costello on May 2nd, 1957. I don't know what Genovese's plan was here. He knew Anastasia would come for him, but he did it anyway. To put the cherry on top, Gigante didn't even succeed. He attempted to kill Costello outside of his apartment. He shot him, but it didn't kill him. But it scared Costello enough that he relinquished control of the family over to Genovese in order to avoid any further assassination attempts. And you would think he really didn't need to kill Anastasia from there, but at the end of the day, he had been whispering to Carlo Gambino that Gambino would be given the position that Anastasia was in. So he really didn't have a choice there. They both had to go. Joseph Bonanno arranged a sit-down between Anastasia and Genovese after Frank Costello was shot, and that's the only reason that Genovese lived as long as he did. Anastasia agreed to let him live, but Genovese obviously couldn't let it go. He had to work to put Carlo Gambino in that position, and plus he just didn't like Anastasia, so he reached out to Perfacci to help him. Persico and Gallo, with scarves covering their face, came into the barber shop. They attacked Anastasia while he was having his hair cut. After shoving the barber out of the way, Anastasia attempted to fight back, but what he was shooting at was actually the reflection in the floor-length mirror that he was attacking, because he had already been shot a few times and his coordination was all off. Gallo and Persico continued to shoot until Anastasia died. Now, this might be one of the biggest things that Joe Gallo is known for. Again, I say, it hurt my soul to continue to have respect for this man, because if you watch my Anastasia video, I love that guy, especially because of how much help he provided to Luciano. He was the only reason that Luciano got out of prison in his 30 to 50 year sentence, so I really liked him, but I slept on it, and after some deep reflection, I don't hold it against Gallo. I do still hate Genovese with a burning, fiery passion, though. Persico and Gallo can get a pass on it. Persico often joked that he was part of Gallo's barbershop quintet, so it's pretty clear that Gallo was the ringleader of the attack. He planned it and he executed it, and it was done perfectly. As much as I love Anastasia, it is pretty impressive. As I said in that video, I'm pretty sure that they planned it with Anastasia's bodyguard, because his bodyguard was always with him, and conveniently at this time he was on a walk. So the fact that they were successful in this hit of a mafia boss is some pretty boss level shit themselves. Perfacci had Joe and Larry Gallo sworn in as made men after this hit, which is a pretty big deal. It was a pretty controversial move too. A lot of fellow mobsters didn't want him to be made because he couldn't take orders and he wanted to do things on his own all the time. A lot of the same reasons the Navy didn't want him. And once you become a made member, you're virtually indestructible. So they fought hard, but he did still end up going through with it and making him a made man. The next year, in 1958, Joe Gallo and his two brothers were called to Washington, D.C. to testify at the McClellan Committee Trials. The McClellan Committee, or the United States Senate Select Committee on Improper Activities in Labor and Management, was created on January 30th, 1957, and it was disbanded March 31st, 1960. The committee was made up of special prosecutors from the U.S. Senate, and it was created because there was a problem with organized crime in the labor unions and in labor racketeering. Robert F. Kennedy led the committee. It was all brought forth because in 1956, there was a scandal of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, and it really was focused around Jimmy Hoffa after him and Johnny Dio conspired to create fake paper companies in order to bolster Hoffa's voting power and overtake Dave Beck, who was currently leading the Teamsters Union. The committee was a worldwide news scandal, and the proceedings were televised internationally and watched by millions and millions of people. Gallo somehow knew that Kennedy was really easy to trigger, so when he was called to testify in front of the committee, he was kinda nuts. He flirted with Kennedy's secretary, and he told Kennedy that his carpet would be an excellent place for a dice game. So that's super ballsy to come into a senator's office and tell him, hey, I could do an illegal act here really well. Like, the balls. Gallo and his brothers didn't provide any useful information to the committee, not that anybody expected them to. But during this broadcast testimony, Gallo became a household name. When he pled the fifth, his exact words were, "I respectfully decline to answer because I honestly believe my answer might tend to incriminate me." He wouldn't answer anything. They asked him where he went to school, if his parents were alive, a multitude of questions, and he only gave one answer. It was a very clearly disrespectful answer, but in a polite way. It's like writing that email to the person that you work with and you're really telling them to screw off, but, you have to word it professionally. When he was sworn in, they asked, "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" Joe answered, "Sure." When Kennedy responded with, "Pardon me, like what?" He answered, "I do," with a roll of his eyes. And he lit a cigarette. Back then, obviously, it was legal to do that kind of stuff. He looked into a camera the entire time that he uttered this sentence over and over and over again with a big smile on his face. And from that point on, Gallo was a star. Media outlets discussed his fashion choices. His antics with Kennedy's secretary were gossiped about, and his smirk was rebroadcast over and over and over again. The entire world was enamored by this guy. In 1960, Gallo married Jeffy Lee Boyd. She was a Las Vegas showgirl. They met when Gallo was hanging around a jazz club. She had previously been married to Jerry Mulligan. He was a saxophone legend in his own right. Now, Gallo's running around killing people, and Jeffy is telling Gallo that he's too soft on people, that he should be tougher on people, and he should stop being a head case, which is what she called him, when he would be emotionally affected by the bad things that he was ordered to do to people. So outside of the Anastasia murder, this may be what Gallo is most well known for. On February 27th, 1961, Gallo and his brothers kidnapped 4 of the top men in the Perfacci family. They grabbed the underboss, Joseph Magliocco. They grabbed Frank Perfacci, who is Joe Perfacci's brother. They grabbed Salvatore Musacchia, who was a capo, and John Scamone, a soldier. Joe Perfacci was supposed to be part of the group that was kidnapped, but I guess he caught wind of it somehow and he jetted. He took off to Florida to avoid being kidnapped. There was a movie made, or this was in a show. I can't remember for the life of me. I've been researching it. I cannot find it. But I remember there was a movie or a show with this situation where they come in and they kidnap their bosses. Larry and Albert Gallo sent Joe to California so that they could handle the hostage situation. They were kind of like, yo, you're too crazy. Go away. Joe wanted to kill one of the hostages and demand $100,000 before negotiations even began, but Larry overruled him. None of the hostages were killed. Joe Perfacci, along with his consigliere Charles the Sige Locitro, made a deal for the peaceful surrender of the hostages after they had held them in captivity for weeks. Like, it was a really long time that they kept these men. During negotiations to give the hostages back, Perfacci agreed that he was going to keep the peace as long as everybody is kept safe. But on August 20th, 1961, he ordered the murder of Larry Gallo and Joseph Joe Jelly, which is funny because Joe Jelly sounds like Joe Gelli, and his last name actually means jewelry in Italian. He was a member of the Gallo crew. Joe Gelli was invited fishing, and he was murdered on the lake. Carmine Persico, who had killed Anastasia with Joe Gallo, attempted to strangle Larry to death. He and Salvatore Sally D'Ambrosio tried to kill Larry at the Sahara Club in East Flatbush, New York. An NYPD officer had just so happened to be there, and he intervened, and Larry lived. But this started a whole new thing because Persico had previously been on Gallo's side against Perfacci. Persico had always been in Gallo's crew. They worked together, and it kind of came out of nowhere that he hopped over onto Perfacci's side. Once he tried to kill Larry, the Gallos started calling Persico the Snake, and that nickname stuck, so he was known as Carmine the Snake Persico, and he absolutely hated the nickname. This battle led to a gang war that came to be known as the First Colombo War. 9 people were murdered and 3 people went missing. The Gallo crew hid in the dormitory while war raged on the streets. So pretty much they hid while everybody else was fighting over the problem that they caused. Later on, Persico was indicted for the attempted murder of Larry, but he refused to testify, so all charges were dropped. In November of 1961, Gallo was convicted of conspiracy and extortion for attempting to extort money from a businessman. He was sentenced to 7 to 14 years in prison. The sentence was served at Greenhaven Correctional Facility, Attica Correctional Facility, and Auburn Correctional Facility. So his conspiracy and extortion was when he tried to muscle a Brooklyn restaurant owner. The owner was Theodore Moss. He tried to sell him $48,000 worth of stolen liquor, and he demanded a cut of the business. He told Moss, "I'll put you in the hospital for a couple of months if you don't cut me in." Gallo refused to say one word throughout his entire defense. The whole trial, he refused to say one word. He did refer to the ATA as "you dirty rats," but that was it. The trial only lasted 3 days, and the jury really quickly found him guilty. While he was on trial, 14 members of his crew were arrested for consorting with criminals. In other words, they literally got arrested for hanging out with each other, because the criminals were each other. Among those arrested included his father, Albert Gallo. Most guys named Umberto just changed their name to Albert. Albert Anastasia did the same thing. His real name was Umberto. So Albert Gallo, his father, was arrested. And both of his brothers, Larry and Albert Gallo Jr., the cops actually arrested them to try to prevent the war that they knew was coming. They heard that the Gallo mob was about to declare war on the Perfacci family because of their beef with Joe Perfacci. Recently, one of their members, Joseph Magnasco, was gunned down on his way to see his mother. No arrests were ever made, but authorities believed he was killed because of his loyalty and support of Perfacci. Even after the war started, he had started out as a member of the Gallo crew, and he supported Perfacci, and as much as they tried, they couldn't make him stop, so they just killed him. Interesting way to handle things, but to each his own. Gallo sued the state after his time at Greenhaven Correctional Facility. He said that the guards inflicted cruel and unusual punishment on him because he allowed an African-American barber to cut his hair. Gallo became very enmeshed with the African-American population in prison, and that posed a problem because there's a very strict color coding system in prison, especially at that time. You just didn't mingle with anybody that didn't look like you. Gallo thought that was BS, and he became really good friends with an African-American drug trafficker who was named Leroy Nicky Barnes. And he coached him on upgrading his business meaning criminal organization. But honestly, at the end of the day, the guards retaliating against him was probably the least of his problems, but he couldn't do anything about anybody else. When he got out of prison, he was stick thin, he looked sick, his skin was hanging off his face, he was emaciated. Someone said that he looked like he had been on a decade-long hunger strike. He had actually lost all that weight because after his association with fellow African-American prisoners, the Aryan Nation prisoners put actual human feces into any food that was served to Gallo. So he just stopped eating for a long, long time. While he was at Auburn Correctional Facility, there was a massive prison riot. Gallo ended up rescuing a severely wounded CO, and that CO ended up testifying for him at his parole hearing. And a fellow prisoner, Donald Francos, had also testified there as well. And he said that Gallo was articulate and had excellent verbal skills, being able to describe gouging a man's guts out with the same eloquent ease as he used discussing classical literature. Which is kind of messed up. You go to a parole hearing, you're trying to prove that, you're a great person. So the fact that he's talking about how Gallo talks about ripping people apart, not the greatest. While he was in prison, his brother, Larry Gallo, passed away from cancer. Jeffy divorced him, and she went on to marry a rich Englishman, and the world changed drastically. His reputation had also grown a lot, and at this point, he was a celebrity. A movie was made whose main character was known to be based on him. It was named The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight. And his already existing notoriety from the committee trials, from everything that he had done underground, and it all made Gallo a straight-up household name. Everybody in the world knew who Joe Gallo was. Whenever he went out, paparazzi would be there taking pictures, and newspapers would discuss what he was wearing in detail. He mingled with a lot of art connoisseurs, and writers, and actresses, comedians, and playwrights, and hung out with all of those people during the day. And then at night, he would go out and hang out with all his criminal friends and do the crimes that, he got to the point that he was at doing. His opinions on politics and philosophy were highly regarded. He was actually scheduled to appear on a TV show to talk about New Age journalism. Every man in the world wanted to be him, and every woman wanted to be with him. So now he gets out of prison, and Jeffy hears about this. She had divorced him. He was gone for, I think, over 10 years. But as soon as she hears that he got out, she goes running. Screw the Englishman, she's going for Gallo. And they got remarried, and they moved into an apartment in Greenwich Village. Another huge, earth-shattering thing that happened while Gallo was in prison is that Joe Perfacci ended up dying of cancer as well. This was a pretty big deal since Perfacci and the Gallows had some serious issues for a really, really long time. Joseph Magliocco, the underboss that they had kidnapped, became the new boss of the family. And also on May 19th, 1963, the Gallo hit team shot Persico multiple times. He ended up surviving, but this rift that went between the Gallo crew and the Perfacci family, which I don't know if it changed to the Magliocco family. I never saw anything about the Magliocco family. The rift between the Gallo crew and what would come to be known as the Colombo family, it wasn't going anywhere. Later in 1963, the Gallows made peace with Magliocco and Persico's faction through negotiations that were facilitated by the Patriarca family, a crime family based in Rhode Island and Boston, Massachusetts. The family boss, Raymond Patriarca, he facilitated the whole thing and made sure it went smoothly. The 1963 peace agreement put an end fully to the fighting between the two factions, but when Gallo got out of jail, he said, well, the peace agreement doesn't apply to me because I was in prison when it was made. Colombo took control of the family, and he, with Joseph Iacovelli, tried to sit down with Gallo and offer him $1,000 to abide by the peace agreement that was made while he was in prison, but Gallo demanded $100,000 to settle it. Colombo absolutely refused. On June 28, 1971, Joseph Colombo was shot 3 times in Columbus Circle in Manhattan, and this happened during the second Unity Day rally. The shooter was Jerome Johnson. Colombo's bodyguards immediately killed him. Colombo did survive, but he was paralyzed for the rest of his life and pretty much in a vegetative state, which is so sad. The police obviously investigated, but after extensive investigation, they concluded that Johnson worked on his own, but nobody nobody in the underground believed that for a second. Everybody knew that Joe Gallo had something to do with this shooting. Everyone in the Colombo family believed that Gallo ordered the hit, especially since he was yelling about how he was going to kill all the Colombos almost immediately after getting out of jail. And let's be honest, 9 out of 10 chance he did do it, because why? Why would Jerome Johnson even do it? They never had a reason. Nobody ever knew why. But I plan on doing a video about Colombo one day, so it's a question for a different video, but it doesn't make any sense to me. When Gallo remarried Jeffy, they moved into an apartment on 14th Street in Manhattan. One night, Gallo had a really bad problem with his tooth, and it just so happened that there was a dentist that worked on the ground floor of the building that they had moved into. In the dentist's office, Sina Essery worked. Gallo had instantly fallen in love. He had hearts in front of his eyes, and, his eyes were bugging out of his head like in the cartoons. He just instantly fell for this girl. He considered her like beauty pageant contestant beautiful. She also just so happened to live in the same building, and she lived in the penthouse apartment. So Gallo and Sina obviously start dating. Gallo lived on the 14th floor, Sina lived in the penthouse on the 21st floor. So Gallo would go to the 14th floor and spend time with Jeffy, and then he'd just go up to the 21st floor and spend time with Sina. He had both his girls in one building. What more can you ask for? Now, while all of this is going on, Jeffy does know that Gallo is having an affair. Sina grew up in the South, and Jeffy would refer to her as Joey's hillbilly whore. She probably said it like hua. That's all the older Italian New Yorkers. That's how they said it. Joey's hillbilly hua. It angered her to no end that he was seeing her. Obviously, that's her husband. And it made her even more mad that she had the penthouse in the building, which is a lot larger and nicer than the apartment that she was in. Santa was having her apartment paid for by her sugar daddy, employer, the dentist. Gallo regularly beat Jeffy. When Jeffy made Gallo aware of Sina's living arrangement being paid for by the dentist, he beat the absolute crap out of her. And the violence just escalated from there. On New Year's Eve, during a party at their house, they both got really drunk and Jeffy started popping off. He grabbed her by the arm and dragged her into the other room so that the people at the party couldn't see, but they did hear him beating the absolute shit out of her. So Jeffy comes home one day and there's a moving truck outside the building. And she notices, like, hey, that's my dresser. What the hell is going on? Everything of hers had been loaded onto this moving truck. When she confronts the movers, he says he was instructed to load everything that she owns onto the truck and move it to California. So he finally gets rid of the Jeffy problem. He walks away from his apartment, took all his stuff, and moved upstairs into the penthouse to live with Sina and her 10-year-old daughter, Lisa, pretty much the day that he got rid of Jeffy. The dentist stopped paying the rent, but honestly, he was lucky that Gallo let him live. That man was a very, very lucky person because he just walked away. He stopped paying the rent, and that was that. But Gallo was a little crazy, and things could have gone a whole different route. As soon as Gallo's divorce to Jeffy was finalized, he and Sina got married. Sina and her daughter Lisa ended up hyphenating their names, and now they were Sina and Lisa Essay Gallo. Sina said that the only time that Gallo ever lost his temper with her was when she accepted a package that he thought was actually a bomb. It didn't end up being a bomb, but he did lose his mind on her for accepting that package in the first place. So Gallo had pretty recently become worldwide famous. The trials that he became famous for weren't too much before he went into jail. But he had already been famous in the underground for years. Gallo was that day and age's John Gotti. He was the only mobster in New York at the time that would show up in society pages. And with his fashion sense and his personality, he was known to be tough and so cool. He wrote poetries, he wrote raps, and he wanted to manage jazz performers. He painted, and art world aristocracy chased after his work. So Gallo and Sina continue living a celebrity lifestyle, but he's doing this with a lot of beef. On his 43rd birthday, on April 7th, 1972, he went out with Senna, his bodyguard Pete the Greek Diapolis' girlfriend Edith Russo, and Gallo's sister Carmela. They all went to the Copacabana with Jerry Orbach. Jerry Orbach is actually Lenny Briscoe on Law and Order, so the fact that he was hanging out with him is pretty cool. And he actually played Kid Sally in The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight. So it was like the fake Joe Gallo and the real Joe Gallo hanging out and clubbing in Manhattan for the night. So it's cool to think about. After leaving the Copacabana, Jerry Orbach headed out. He was tired. He went home. Gallo, Senna, Pete the Greek, Edith, and Carmela all headed to Umberto's Clam house at around 4:30 in the morning. Gallo and Pete the Greek were sitting with their backs towards the door. The details of the entire situation are very murky. A lot of people have a lot of different stories, but somebody came in and shot Gallo multiple times. Pete the Greek was also shot, but he was only shot in the hip and he did survive. Gallo flipped the table over so that Senna and her daughter wouldn't get caught in the hailstorm of bullets that were being rained upon him. He actually ended up walking away, and he took the hailstorm of bullets with him and away from his family. And everybody that was there said that he walked away from the table to make sure that while they were shooting at him, they weren't going to shoot his family. As soon as he saw them coming, he tried to reach for his firearm, but he just didn't have time. It was too quick. It happened in a split second, and he didn't have a chance to grab his firearm. He had already been shot about 20 times before he even had a chance to go into his hip. He walked out of the door and died on the sidewalk right outside Umberto's. He was officially pronounced dead shortly after 5:30 in the morning at Beekman Downtown Hospital. Now, this is one of the most famous mafia deaths ever to happen. You know, who's the mafia member that died outside the restaurant? You know, this is Joe Gallo. Especially given his notoriety, everybody was so eager to hear every piece of information that came out regarding this murder. It is very, very, very widely speculated who actually did this to Gallo. Of course, the consensus is it's the Colombos in retaliation for Gallo shooting Joe Colombo. But the claim is that Joseph Luparelli, who was a Colombo associate, saw Gallo enter Umberto's and reached out to Iacovelli. Luparelli claims that he hit up Philip Gambino, Carmine Sonny Pinto DeBase, and two other men within the Patriarca family to kill Gallo. He says that he was the getaway driver, and the four men that he had contacted were the ones that actually carried out the hit. The only problem with this account is that the police say it's a complete lie. The police suspect that there was actually only one shooter, and this is based on crime scene reconstruction and eyewitness testimony. But the police put out a fake story to the media saying that there was 3 shooters. Now, this made it a lot easier for them to sift through any claims, anyone that wanted to say that they did it to get notoriety. They immediately dismissed any claims or confessions of the crime that were claimed to be more than one shooter. And Luparelli swears that there were 3, which is pretty much just following along with the fake story that the cops put out. Nobody was ever arrested for Luparelli's confession to the media, and the police just brushed him off as a liar. They're pretty sure that he came forward with these claims in order to avoid a mafia war. Umberto's was a Genovese family-owned restaurant. If somebody didn't take public claim to this murder, it would force the Colombo's hands into attacking the Genovese family, because it would look like the Genovese family authorized a hit on their own turf and killing of a Colombo family member. But if the Colombo bosses claim that the murder was spontaneously ordered by one of their own people, they wouldn't have to go to war. So that's probably what happened. Coincidentally, one of the people that were at Umberto's at that ungodly hour at 4:30 in the morning when Gallo was shot was an anonymous man that went on to become a New York Times editor. He claims that Frank Sheeran, a hitman and a labor union boss, was actually the shooter. Frank Sheeran is the one who the movie The Irishman is based on. That's probably my favorite mafia movie. It has so many real life facts, and I loved watching it and picking out like, oh, that's true. That's this. So it's a really good movie. If you haven't seen it, I really highly recommend go watch The Irishman. It's on Netflix. But yeah, this New York Times editor claims that it was him, Frank Sheeran, that carried out the hit. Sheeran corroborated this. He gave a deathbed confession to being the lone gunman to kill Gallo. and that Russell Buffalino had ordered him to do it. And he said that Buffalino wanted him dead because his flashy lifestyle and the attraction of attention towards the Italian-American Civil Rights League. The Unity Day that Joseph Colombo was shot at was actually an event for the Italian-American Civil Rights League. Jerry Capici, who is a journalist and a mafia expert, and I've cited him quite a few times in my videos, he went to Umberto's to report on Gallo's murder. He wasn't there beforehand, but he went there to report for the New York Post. He thinks Sheeran was the killer as well, but Sheeran's confession was met with a lot of skepticism by cops, and Michael Franzisi says that it is absolutely unequivocally not true. He was talking about it because he was asked if he had any knowledge of what went on in The Irishman, the movie, and he turned around and said, no, absolutely not. That's not what happened. I know for a fact what happened there. And he was involved in the mafia at the time. It is very possible that he does know. As far as I know, he never went public and told what actually happened, but he did say that Sheeran didn't kill him. Jeffy also claims that there was multiple men. She said that they were all short and Italian looking. Frank Sheeran is 6'4" and Irish. Jeffy is the only reliable witness. I mean, Carmela would be too. And I don't know if maybe Jeffy is still claiming to this day that there was multiple men because the cops put that out. I don't know. I'm not really sure. But the fact that she continues to say that there was multiple men, I have a feeling that the same way that all of the information came out about like Luciano and Anastasia, it came out like this year or last year. One day, sometime soon, the paperwork for Joe Gallo's death is gonna come out from the FBI. The FBI is gonna release it. And some groundbreaking information is going to be in it that they just never released to the public. So we'll know one day soon, but as of right now, we don't know everything that the cops know, so it could have been anyone. Now, this was the first Mafia hit ever to be done in front of the Mafia member's family. And that fact is a huge push behind it actually being the Colombos that carried out the hit, because Joseph Colombo had been shot in front of his family. Colombo was alone on stage, but his family was there. They're traumatized from watching him die. They were in attendance in the audience. But the huge difference between Gallo's murder and the way that Mafia hits are usually carried out kind of points to the only thing making sense being that it was in retaliation for Colombo's shooting. Because otherwise, if it was just a regular Mafia hit, it's more than likely that it wouldn't have taken place in front of the family. One of the huge reasons that I've always had so much respect to the Mafia in America is because they always had a solid rule that families of the Mafia members, even Mafia members that turned out to be snitches, they were all kept far outside of the life. They were kept away from the crimes that the people committed, including murders. A lot of families of snitches continue to be taken care of financially by the families after they were killed. So it's really surprising that this all went down the way it did. It happened in front of Gallo's sister, his wife, his stepdaughter. It just shows that it was more of an impulsive act than a commission-sponsored hit. It was probably the Colombos. But as I said, one day soon we are going to get an FBI release because it has to be a certain amount of time between when it happened and when they release it. Anastasia's just came out a few years ago, within the last 2-3 years. So within the next 4 or 5 years, we'll know everything that the cops know about this murder. But as of right now, this time, we don't know all of the facts, but it looks like more than likely it was the Colombos. Now, the Gallo crew wanted revenge. Carmela told Joe's body in his casket that the streets would run red with blood. Albert Gallo sent a hitman to a Manhattan restaurant to kill Iacovelli, Alphonse Persico, and Gennaro Langella, who were all dining there. But the gunman was from Las Vegas. He wasn't from the Mafia, and he didn't recognize the members of the family. Because remember, Gallo was no longer with the family, so he didn't have the ability to just go into the family and pluck out hitmen. So they had to contract outside, and this guy that's from Vegas doesn't know these guys. He ended up shooting 4 innocent diners that were completely uninvolved in any crime family, and 2 of them ended up dying. Michael Franzisi has since come out and been very public with the media and everybody about what happened during his time in the mafia. I saw an interview with him where the interviewer had asked him, like, oh, these innocent diners actually died in Las Vegas. That's not what happened. So if you ever see that, I don't know why Franzisi said that that was what happened, but it's not. That didn't happen. I guess it's because the gunman was from Las Vegas, but this happened in Manhattan. It was in Little Italy. Now, obviously, Iacovelli, Persico, and Langella, they know that the people that were killed were accidentally killed because somebody was coming after them. Now, Iacovelli darts. He leaves New York with the quickness. And Persico takes control as the new boss of the Colombo family. Iacovelli at the time was consigliere and Mineo its underboss. And he had made it clear he has absolutely no interest in taking over as the boss of the family. He wanted no part of it. Carmine Persico was already in prison for a completely unrelated crime of hijacking and loan sharking, and he was doing an 8-year sentence, but he was able to lead the family from prison. But you always need to have an acting boss to be the boss on the outside. You can't completely run the family. You could be the boss of the family, but there always has to be an acting boss that is not currently in prison. Now, obviously, Joseph Colombo had been the boss, but he was shot, and now he's in a vegetative state, paralyzed, done for in a hospital bed somewhere. So he's no longer the boss. Vincenzo Aloy, who was Carlo Gambino's godson, took over as the acting boss while Persico was in prison. Now soon, the second Colombo War starts up. The Gallo crew was absolutely not stopping in their pursuit of revenge for Joe Gallo's death. This war lasted from 1971 to 1975, and it led to the Colombo family kind of like splitting down the middle, and half went to the actual family, Persico led, and the other half went with the Gallo crew, because the Gallo crew is huge. There's a lot of, we say the Gallo crew. The Gallo crew's not just the 3 brothers. The Gallo crew it's a large gang. So the Colombo family splits. And they're at war now. Now, Aloy's reign as acting boss did not last long at all, because he was convicted of perjury for lying to a grand jury when he claimed that he had not visited a Colombo family safe house prior to Gallo's murder. So it's funny because both of the Colombo Wars, Gallo just ignited both of them. One of them was after he died, but it was still about him. Joey Brancato was currently acting as a capo for John Sonny Franzisi. Franzisi was doing 50 years in Leavenworth for bank robbery. Brancato stepped into the role as the acting boss, but he made it extremely clear the entire time that he wanted no part of being the actual boss, but he was doing this on a very, very, very temporary basis. It seems like the elite of the Colombo family were cursed at the time. I don't blame him for not wanting to be the boss. They're literally picking at straws to get somebody to lead the family. So it's not surprising at all that nobody wants to be the boss here, because everybody's either getting killed or going to jail. Would you want to take that step? I don't. Brancato took the job on in order to stop the Second Colombo War. That is wreaking havoc within the family. You can't be a family and be split in half. So this is not okay, and Brancato steps in to put a stop to it. He, along with the bosses of the other families, the commission, negotiated a deal where Albert Gallo and the rest of his crew were able to join the Genovese family, and they did this peacefully. It ended the 4-year war that most people within the families called the Gallo Wars. The day that this deal was struck, Brancato steps down as the acting boss. He goes back to Long Island, and he just wants to run his crew on Long Island. He wants no part of this being the boss of the family stuff. Since nobody's left to run the family, Persico just continues to run it from prison, and he picks somebody. So he puts Thomas DiBella in place as the acting boss. He also promoted Alphonse Alley Boy Persico, who was fresh out of jail. He had just served a 17-year sentence, and he was one of the guys that had almost been killed at that restaurant where the 4 innocent people were attacked. He makes him consigliere, and Anthony Tony Shots Abatamarco now becomes the underboss. Persico got out of jail in 1979, but goes right back in. As soon as he got out, he got sent right back for conspiracy, racketeering, all the mafia charges he got charged with in 1981. So he had literally been out of prison for 2 years, and he got another 5 years. And then comes the Mafia Commission Trials. The Colombo family got hit the hardest out of all 5 families by the Mafia Commission Trials. By far, they took the most severe blows than any of the other 4 families. Even though the aim by authorities was to take down the entire organization, the commission is just a group of the 5 families' leaders. So with the commission trials, authorities were trying to take down all 5 families, but they did end up hitting the Colombos so much harder than the other families. Every single one of their leaders were indicted. Carmine Persico, who was already in prison at the time, and Gennaro Langella, who had stepped into the underboss position, they each received 100-year prison sentences. Alphonse Persico was the acting boss, but even he was later arrested. The whole family was a big shit show. Joe Gallo's influence on today's world is actually pretty prominent. A lot of the things that he did is still known. I mean, to people who aren't interested in mafia effects, they may just know, like, oh yeah, that mafia member that was killed outside the restaurant. Or, oh, that mafia guy that kidnapped the leaders of his family. Or, oh, the ones that killed Anastasia in the barbershop. You know, these little facts about him, they may know that and may not know exactly who he is or what he did. But a movie was written in 1974 called Crazy Joe. So this was literally about him. It wasn't based on him. It was about him. The movie was based on articles that had been written by Nicolas Gage. He was a writer for the New York Times. It doesn't look like it has any big names that acted in it, but it was distributed by Columbia Pictures, and it aired in the US and in Italy, and it made $628 million in Italy alone. Now, I think that was low because I did see a couple of people say it flopped in Italy, but it did make a lot of money. Originally, they were trying to get Robert De Niro to play Gallo, but he didn't end up doing it. Martin Scorsese was initially going to be Lazzani's assistant on the film, but he ended up dropping out of the project, so he wasn't involved in it. If those 2 names had actually ended up doing the movie, it probably would be one of those like iconic gangster movies like Goodfellas or The Godfather. A song, which it was 12 verses. It's more like a ballad. It was written by Bob Dylan. It was named Joey, and it was all about Joe Gallo. He actually caught some heat for that. He was criticized after making the song because people thought that he was romanticizing Gallo's life in the song, and they didn't like that because Gallo was a criminal and he killed people, you know, so they got mad at that. Sebastian Maniscalco plays Joe Gallo in The Irishman. Again, great movie. Go watch it. I promise it's good. Now, this is one of my theories. It's not substantiated. It's just kind of something that I thought up on my own. I did find one Reddit thread that was dedicated to it after I had thought about it. No word has ever come out by writers or anything, but this is my theory on it. I think that in The Sopranos, Tony Soprano's death at the end of The Sopranos is a nod to Gallo's death as well. In The Sopranos, Tony goes out to a restaurant with his family and was killed in the restaurant. Yes, that is what I think happened. Tell me in the comments if you believe differently. We can debate, but I am 100% convinced that he was killed at that restaurant. When it went black, that was him dying. And that's exactly like Gallo's death. He was out to dinner with his family and he was killed. Also, earlier in the episode, AJ and his new girlfriend are listening to Bob Dylan, which is a nod to the Bob Dylan song named Joey. It wasn't the actual song named Joey. They were listening to a song called It's Alright Ma, I'm Only Bleeding, but I believe it's an Easter egg. And those are dropped into movies all the time. Like, there's that one that the writers actually substantiated. They said that Tarzan is Elsa and Anna's brother from Frozen and Tarzan. So writers of movies do this stuff. And I am convinced that that was a nod to Joe Gallo. Now, coincidentally, Tony's wife's name is Carmela. I don't think this is an Easter egg because his wife's name had always been Carmela, unless they had the idea from the very beginning that they were gonna write the end of the show to coincide with Gallo's death. Then maybe that's why they named his wife Carmela. But if they didn't have any plans on it, Carmela is a very Italian female name, so it's definitely possible that that was just coincidence. But I definitely think there is a possibility that they said said when they were first starting the show, like, hey, we're going to nod to Joe Gallo in the death, so let's name the wife the sister's name, because the sister was actually there for Gallo. Staying with the Sopranos, in a prior episode, Paulie mentions that he barely survived the Colombo Wars, and that's a nod to Gallo, who was killed by the Colombos during the Gallo Wars. Tony had killed Phil Leotardo in front of his family, which is the same way that Gallo killed Colombo in front of his family, and Tony was then killed in front of his family at a restaurant the same way that Gallo was. So I am convinced that Tony Soprano's death was based on Joe Gallo's death, which is pretty cool. I mean, it's really cool to be researching Joe Gallo and then read about his death and have it trigger in my mind like, that sounds a lot like The Sopranos, and see that there's a Reddit thread already written that somebody else had actually thought about it. Sana Esseri now lives on a farm in Nashville where she rescues thoroughbred horses. She's currently writing a biography. Before she met a man and fell in love and had her daughter, Esseri actually planned on becoming a nun. Obviously, that didn't work out. After witnessing Gallo's death, she said that she has PTSD and flinches every time a car backfires, which is completely understandable. Like, that might be one of the most traumatic things that can happen for somebody that is not involved in criminal enterprises. You know, this girl probably has never even heard a gunshot, and all of a sudden you're sitting there and your husband is being gunned down in a restaurant. I don't blame her for having PTSD. She has since married both a gynecologist and a Wall Street financier, so she had married 2 men before Gallo, and then 2 men after Gallo. Maybe she would have been better off being a nun. But she did end up having Lisa, and Lisa is a successful casting director in Hollywood, which is great. She made something out of herself, and she still hyphenates her name, Esseri Gallo. So that's the story of this absolute savage of a man, Joseph Crazy Joey Gallo. Thanks so much for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, do all the things. And I hope you come back next time. Thanks so much. Bye.